When former Sergeant Luke Harrison moved his 6-year-old daughter with a heart condition into his late grandfather's abandoned weather station on Snowfall Hill, people laughed. The locals called it the Frostbite Shack. His in-laws said it was worthless, and even the bank threatened to seize it. The roof leaked, the walls groaned, and the cold wind crawled through every crack, yet Luke saw a last chance to give Maggie a home, with only his loyal German Shepherd, Ranger, to keep them warm. But everything changed. The Night Ranger clawed through the rotting floorboards of the observatory room and uncovered a sealed metal box. Project Skypulse Atmospheric Control Prototype. Suddenly, this ruin wasn't junk. It was the key to controlling weather itself. But would Luke discover its true power before the unmarked SUVs circling the hill took everything, including his daughter? Winter draped Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in a silence so deep it felt like time itself was holding its breath beneath layers of ice and wind-scarred snow. The narrow road to Snowfall Hill was little more than a tired ribbon of frozen dirt, curling toward the lonely silhouette of an abandoned weather station, standing like a forgotten sentinel against the pale sky. Inside a dented old pickup truck, Ethan Miller drove with steady hands, though his mind wandered through storms far colder than the one outside. 42 years old, former Army sergeant, his face bore the quiet austerity of someone who had seen too much angular jaw, days-old stubble, lightly scarred from a roadside explosion years ago, and tired steel-blue eyes that held both exhaustion and stubborn hope. His faded green military coat hung loosely on his shoulders, worn at the seams, but warm enough to shield him from the Wyoming wind. On the worn leather seat beside him sat Lily, his 6-year-old daughter, a small, delicate child with pale skin, soft brown hair tucked beneath a knitted pink hat, and dark, gentle eyes that always seemed to listen, even when she didn't speak. Wrapped in a bubblegum pink winter coat, she cradled a faded cloth doll close to her chest, always over her heart, where the faint flutter of her congenital defect beat a little too softly, a little too slowly. Each breath she took was careful, like she was afraid of breaking the silence inside her. And in the space between them lay Ranger, their 5-year-old German Shepherd. Big, vigilant, fur thickened by winter, black and tan with one bent ear and a thin scar over his brow. He watched the road with the instinctive alertness of a guardian. Some dogs served. Ranger remembered. They arrived. The weather station was a worn skeleton of stone, steel, and wind-battered glass. The once proud observatory dome was cracked, its metal ribs exposed, like a ribcage protecting a heart long forgotten. The faded door still bore the name, Raymond Miller, Meteorological Research Facility. Raymond Miller, Ethan's grandfather, had been a storm chaser, a meteorologist, and a dreamer. He once told Ethan as a boy, "The sky keeps secrets, but the wind tells the truth." Some said he was brilliant, others said he was mad. But Lily, who had never met him, simply whispered, "I think he heard something the rest of the world ignored." Ethan parked the truck and carried Lily through the brittle wind. The freezing air bit at his cheeks, but her small arms wrapped around his neck felt like warmth that couldn't be measured in temperature. Ranger trotted ahead, scouting the perimeter, as though checking for intruders or ghosts. Ethan was never quite sure which. Inside, the station smelled of rust, paper, and a faint electrical hum, like memories trying to wake. Dust floated in the pale light that slipped through the cracked skylight. Old storm maps still lined the walls. Ink faded to almost mythic swirls. And weather journals lay piled on tables like abandoned scripture. A heavy mechanical panel stood in silence, once used to measure atmospheric static. Lily shuffled forward, boots crunching on the dusty floor. "It feels not empty," she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. His mind was too full of survival, food supplies, medication schedules, insulation, and whether his old army buddy could still get him night shifts at the town diner. He wasn't thinking about the weather station's past, only that it had walls, a roof, and 4 corners wide enough to protect a fragile heartbeat. But Ranger, he wasn't thinking about walls. He stopped, frozen, every sense alert. His ears flattened, his head dipped low, eyes fixed on a section of old floorboards near the observatory table. He pawed once, then again, not frantic, not alarmed, like he was asking permission. Lily approached him and gently placed her hand on the cracked plank. "Daddy," she said softly, "it's warm." Ethan crouched, pressing his calloused palm against the floor, and felt it. A subtle vibration, not mechanical, not natural, something hidden, alive, under the dust, time, and sorrow. Lily's voice floated through the fading light like a whisper from someone long gone. Grandpa's storm is still here. A shiver part fear, part something else, traced down Ethan's spine. And outside, through the dirty glass, Ranger stared toward the snowy horizon, as if sensing something moving through the wind. Not coming, already here. The storm had passed, but the cold remained, clinging to the abandoned weather station like something alive. The windows rattled softly, speaking in their own language of wind and time. Ethan spent the early morning reinforcing cracks with heavy tape, stuffing insulation into gaps, and trying to make the place just warm enough for Lily. Her breathing was thin, lips slightly blue, but her eyes wide, curious, quietly listening, remained full of something he feared to call hope. Ranger stayed close to her every moment, as though he understood her heartbeat too softly to fight the cold alone. Later that afternoon, a small truck rumbled up the icy hill. The door opened, and a woman stepped out, a stranger. She was tall and thin, wrapped in a long, walnut-brown coat with a knitted gray scarf coiled around her neck like a shield from the wind. Her dark hair, almost black, fell loosely over her shoulders, slightly windblown. Her boots were muddy from the road, but her steps were light, careful, like someone used to entering quiet places with respect. Her name was Sarah Whitmore, 38 years old, a local schoolteacher from the valley town. Pale skin, sharp eyebrows, deep hazel eyes that never missed anything, but never judged at first sight. She had heard that a man and a child had moved into the old weather station, and something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps concern, had brought her here with a box of blankets, canned soup, and an uncertain kind of kindness. Ethan met her at the door, shoulders tense, wary. Years of military habit had made caution his first reaction. She introduced herself calmly, speaking with a measured voice, neither timid nor bold. She didn't mention rumors. She didn't ask why a child with a weak heart was living in an ice-cold ruin. She simply offered the blankets and the food. And Ethan, surprised by her absence of pity, nodded silently and let her inside. Lily stood quietly in the far corner, clutching her doll, cheeks pale but eyes bright. Sarah noticed the child's stillness, the way she sat without moving too quickly, as though protecting the fragile rhythm of her own heartbeat. She smiled gently, but did not approach too fast. Ranger evaluated the visitor with silent dignity, tail low but eyes attentive, not hostile, but ready. Sarah reached down, letting him sniff her hand before gently scratching behind his good ear. He accepted the gesture and settled. Silent approval. "You're Ethan Miller," Sarah said softly, her gaze exploring the dusty interior, the faded maps on the walls, the relics of weather instruments. "And this must be the station that used to belong to Raymond Miller." She did not say insane. She did not say eccentric. She said belonged like history, not madness. Ethan watched her a moment before nodding. Sarah's voice softened further. "He was brilliant. My father once attended one of his winter lectures, something about storms born from silence." Ethan blinked. Someone remembered. That evening, after Sarah left, they sat by the weak warmth of the furnace, wrapped in donated blankets. Ranger rested heavily against Lily's legs, radiating steady warmth. The wind whispered against the glass. Ethan looked toward the observatory room, where the floorboard had hummed the night before. Something was waiting. At midnight, Ranger stood, not barking, not growling, just staring at the same cracked floor tile. The humming was stronger. Ethan approached slowly, kneeling, brushing aside dust and loose fragments. Beneath the floor, he could see it now, metal lines, faintly visible, forming a square. Not natural, not structural, a concealed hatch. With effort, he pried it open. Cold air wafted upward, not from outside, but from below, smelling of old paper, metal, earth, and faint electricity. Ranger leaned forward, ears high, but made no sound. Lily stepped softly to her father's side, clutching his sleeve, and whispered, "I told you, Dad. This place remembers." Beneath the floor, a narrow staircase, buried under dust, boards, cobwebs, and time. They descended slowly. The chamber below was small, silent. Not a storm lab, not a bunker, but something between both. Dust-laden shelves lined the walls, filled with notebooks, weather charts, and what looked like coded storm maps. In the center sat a large work table, wood-worn smooth by years of use. On it lay yellowed pages, intricate drawings of a machine labeled Skyweaver Phase 2 prototype. Ethan recognized pieces of the weather station's machinery, but arranged in ways nothing about this place had yet explained. Beside it lay a leather-bound journal, preserved under a cracked glass sheet. He opened it gently. The first page, his grandfather's handwriting, clear despite the years. "We can't stop storms from forming in the sky, but maybe we can feel them before they are born." On the last page, a single line carved into the wood of the table. "Some storms don't begin in the clouds, they begin in the human heart." Lily rested her hand on the table. "Grandpa wasn't looking at the sky," she whispered. He was listening to it. Ethan looked at his daughter, fragile, soft, fading easily in cold air, but with eyes that saw things without needing proof. Maybe this wasn't just a shelter. Maybe it was a beginning. The hum returned, quiet, steady, alive beneath their feet. And Ranger, silent sentinel of storms yet unborn, watched the door they had opened. Morning light seeped into the weather station like a shy visitor, soft and pale, slipping through cracked glass and worn curtains. The hidden chamber under the floor still felt alive, humming faintly like a memory trying to wake. Ethan had barely slept, not from discomfort, but from the unsettling feeling that something beneath this station was waiting not just to be discovered, but to be heard. Lily sat wrapped in her pink coat on the old leather armchair, breathing shallow but peacefully, her eyes following the slow drift of snowflakes beyond the frosted window. Ranger lay beside her, head on his paws, but his ears flicked every few moments, alert to something only he seemed to sense. Ethan carried the dusty components of the Skyweaver device into the main room, clearing a small space near the broken workbench. The machine looked like a strange blend of meteorology, radio, and something far more imaginative: delicate copper coils, cracked voltmeters, trembling wires, and a central glass core with intricate etchings inside, shaped almost like a heartbeat. He remembered his grandfather once saying, "Weather doesn't just happen, it reacts." Back then, he thought it was poetry. Now he wasn't so sure. He connected the old battery system, a dented pack from his army emergency kit with thick red and black clamps. The first attempt sputtered. The second, brief flicker. On the third try, a trembling glow came from the glass core, weak but undeniably alive, like something exhaling for the first time in decades. Lily watched, barely blinking, whispering, "It's breathing, Dad." The machine did not show numbers. No temperature, no barometric pressure, no rainfall predictions. Instead, words formed across the cracked analog display, flickering like uncertain thoughts. Emotional storm forming source, South Jackson Hole type, human, induced turbulence. Ethan frowned. That's impossible. But Lily, fragile yet unshaken, simply stared and whispered, "Maybe storms don't always start in the clouds." The next day, rumors began spreading in the valley town below. Someone claimed lights had flickered on at the old weather station, that Storm Speaker's grandson had returned, and that something inside the station had begun humming again for the first time in 30 years. By afternoon, a black SUV rolled up the icy hill and stopped beside the weather station. A man stepped out, sharp, polished, early 50s, tall and lean, his salt and pepper hair cut precisely, leather gloves, and a charcoal overcoat tailored too neatly for a place like Snowfall Hill. His posture spoke of someone used to negotiation, not conversation. His name was Richard Hale, director of Frontier Atmospheric Technologies, a private climate firm from Denver. His gray eyes were intelligent but calculating, like a man, always measuring value, even in silence. He greeted Ethan with polite confidence, but not warmth, offering a hand and a business card. He spoke of advancements, data rights, meteorological potential, and unlocking the legacy of Raymond Miller. He claimed the land held scientific significance, that the station could be developed commercially, historically, and financially. He talked about weather, but never once said sky. Lily watched from the doorway, pale but steady, clutching her doll. Ranger stood in front of her, still, silent, protective, the faint rumble of a warning growl in his throat. Richard briefly noticed the machine on the table, the Skyweaver prototype, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly, like someone recognizing something they were never supposed to see. "Fascinating," he murmured, but quickly hid his interest, tucking his hands calmly behind his back. He offered to help restore the property, suggested a purchase, mentioned investors, technology grants, and hinted at patents. But Lily stepped forward, voice small, shaky, but unwavering, like a candle, refusing to go out in wind. "If this was something to sell," her voice trembled, "Grandpa would have sold it long ago." Those words landed like quiet thunder. Richard blinked. Ethan didn't speak. Ranger stood firm. The wind outside soft, silent. Listening pressed against the windows like it, too, understood. Snow began to fall then, not heavy, nor wild, but gently, steadily, like something responding. Sarah Whitmore, who had quietly returned and now stood near the door, watching everything unfold, whispered almost to herself, "It's as if the weather is waiting." Inside, the Skyweaver flickered once more, but no longer faint. Its pulse had grown stronger, almost like recognition. Not all storms are made of wind and water. Some are made of eyes that finally see. Some begin not when clouds gather, but when silence ends. And that night, as they watched the snow fall in eerie stillness, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the sky had begun to whisper back. The wind arrived first quiet, breathy, unsure, while frost clung to the weather station windows like veins of white lightning. Ethan woke before dawn, not because of the cold, but because of the silence. A silence that felt too still, too intentional, like the world was holding its breath. Lily lay curled beneath a pile of wool blankets, cheeks a faint shade of rose now, no longer ghost pale. Her breathing was weak, yes, but steady. Ranger lay by her feet, massive chest rising and falling with deep, unwavering calm, tail flicking once, twice alert but undisturbed, like he could sense that something was approaching, though not with footsteps. Before sunrise, they heard tires. Not one vehicle, but several. 3 black SUVs, headlights cutting through the mist like watchful eyes, approached the station slowly, deliberately. Ethan stepped outside, coat tight against the wind, jaw clenched. He expected Richard Hale. But this time, Hale had not come alone. A tall woman stepped out of the lead SUV's sleek charcoal coat, black boots, hair silver blonde and tied in a knot so tight it pulled at the bones of her face. Her eyes were an icy green, sharp, calm, unreadable. Her name was Patricia Klein, 52, corporate lawyer for Frontier Atmospheric Technologies. Her movements were deliberate, precise, like someone who did not walk, but measured space. She greeted Ethan with professional courtesy, her gaze sweeping across the station, without emotion, without judgment, only assessment. Her voice was smooth, almost gentle, yet every word sharpened like polished steel. She brought papers, legal notices, official warnings, citations about safety code violations, property hazards, unstable structures, and most pointedly concerns about the health and well-being of a medically fragile minor. That meant Lily. Behind her stood Richard Hale, same composed posture, same calculating eyes, but now less polite, more insistent. This was no longer a discussion. This was pressure. Hale spoke less of science now, more of liability, risk, ownership, commercial potential. But Patricia, the lawyer, spoke of custody reviews, child protection services, legal removal of occupants if deemed unsafe. She did not threaten. She only informed a more dangerous kind of warning. Lily appeared at the doorway, small frame wrapped in her pink coat, cheeks flushed by cold. She did not speak. But Ranger stood in front of her, not baring teeth, not growling, but rigid, still, protective. Patricia paused. For a moment, her eyes flicked not to the device, not to Ethan, but to Lily. And though nothing changed in her expression, something quiet, something unspoken, passed behind her measured gaze, something almost like hesitation. Then it came. Not from the sky, not from the clouds, not from weather, but from beneath the floorboards. Skyweaver flickered to life on its own. Not weak, not sputtering, but clear, strong, purposeful. The analog display glowed red, soft at first, then pulsing like a warning heartbeat. No numbers, no temperatures, just words. Emerging storm. Type unknown, no precipitation, no wind, no cloud formation, primary impact, human infrastructure. Patricia blinked. Richard frowned. Ethan watched, breath tight, while Lily stepped closer, fragile, but curious, her hand brushing the glass surface like she was listening. Then the words changed. Slowly, intentionally. Storm source. Human design projection. Fires. Vertical bar power. Failure vertical bar flood. Vertical bar communication loss ETA. 72 hours classification. Man-made storm. Patricia's voice was thin now. That shouldn't be possible. Richard's calm facade cracked. Turn it off. But Skyweaver was not displaying prediction. It was displaying intention, not forecasting, warning. Sarah Whitmore arrived then, breathless from the climb. Her wool coat dusted with frost, cheeks pink from wind. She froze at the sight of the SUVs, the tension, the machine glowing on the table. She looked, not afraid, but certain something important was unfolding. Ethan stared at Skyweaver, mind racing. No rain, no snowfall, no wind, but a storm. A storm made of chain reactions, fires, floods, collapsed power grids, destruction without a single drop of water. A human-made chain disaster. Something the world's forecasts could never detect, because it wasn't born in the atmosphere. It was born in human hands. He remembered Raymond's words. Some storms don't come from the sky, some are built. 3 days later, the storm came. No rain, no thunder, just chaos. Power grids flickered and died. Emergency sirens screamed over the valley. Electrical fires sparked. Flooded pipes burst beneath frozen ground. Roads collapsed under ice-swollen soil. Jackson Hole evacuated. But because of Skyweaver, they had time. The storm ripped through the region, yet Snowfall Hill stood steady, untouched, unmoved. The station, old as it was, held strong, like it had always known how to survive storms that didn't come from clouds. Not madness, not myth, but a warning system built before its time. And for the first time in decades, the valley didn't call it the Frostbite Shack. They called it the Listening Station. For 3 days after the storm, Snowfall Hill was no longer silent. Journalists trudged through melting ice to reach the station. Researchers from the National Atmospheric Institute brought portable sensors, notebooks, and a respectful kind of curiosity. Even local townsfolk, once amused, now stood quietly outside the station, not to stare, but to listen, because that's what this hill now demanded. The old weather station was being repaired slowly, cautiously. Broken windows were covered with insulated plexiglass. The roof, once sagging, was stabilized. But Sarah Whitmore insisted they not touch the floorboards of the observatory. Some things aren't broken just because they're old, she told the workers, wrapping her long gray scarf tighter against the cold. Lily stood beside her, holding Ranger's leash, though the dog barely needed it. Ranger, now 7 in the eyes of winter, had earned a strange respect both from villagers and even the technicians. His fur was thick, darker around the ears and tail, and his amber eyes held stillness that no camera could quite capture. He rarely barked, but people noticed how he always stood facing the wind, as though listening with it. One morning, a group arrived in a white government van, not with threats or papers, but with quiet interest. At the front was Dr. Malcolm Hayes, a senior atmospheric behavior specialist. In his early 60s, his once blonde hair now silver, eyebrows bushy but eyes gentle behind rounded glasses. His posture was slightly hunched, not from weakness, but years spent bending over data, weather logs, and unanswered questions. He spoke softly, pausing often, like someone who had learned to weigh words more carefully than theories. What made him different from Richard Hale or Patricia Klein was simple. He did not ask to take the machine. He asked to listen to it. When he saw Skyweaver, he did not approach it like an object, but like meeting an old friend whose voice had grown tired. He ran a hand lightly over the casing, as though acknowledging a history no one had fully recorded. Your grandfather, he said, turning slowly to Ethan, was decades ahead of all modern climate sensing. He wasn't just studying weather. He was studying emotion inside the atmosphere. Ethan did not fully understand, but Lily, standing beside him with pale cheeks and bright eyes, whispered. He was listening to the sky's feelings. "Doctor." Hayes smiled, not at the poetic phrasing, but because she wasn't entirely wrong. Soon, a partnership was offered, not a purchase, not removal. A partnership where the station remained what it had always been, a place of listening. Ethan signed not to sell, but to share its purpose. He had spent years as a soldier, trained to protect land through force. Now, he found himself protecting something far more fragile, an idea. Reporters wanted to know the name of this invention. The team suggested atmospheric sentience model, prediction engine, or weather response grid technology. But Ethan said no. Lily, holding Ranger's ears softly, gave the name not scientific, not technical, but true. The Lily Weather Listening Center. At the small dedication gathering, under pale winter light and gentle wind, Sarah spoke quietly. She stood with her slender frame wrapped in that same gray scarf, hazel eyes reflecting something warmer than sunlight. This station began as a shelter for storms, but it became something different, a shelter for wonder. Lily stood on the porch, wrapped in her pink coat, arms around Ranger's neck. The wind brushed her hair, but for the first time, she did not shiver. Her voice, fragile yet certain, drifted through the cold air, not speaking to people, but to the day itself. "Maybe weather is like people," she said softly. "It doesn't always want to be controlled. Sometimes it just wants to be understood." No one replied. Wind answered instead. And that, somehow, was enough. In the end, the greatest discovery was not the machine, nor the hidden chamber beneath the floorboards, but the quiet reminder that the most powerful forces in life cannot be measured, captured, or controlled. Hope, love, prayer, and the quiet miracles God sends when we least expect them. Sometimes his miracles do not appear as lightning, parted seas, or dramatic signs from the sky. Sometimes they arrive in gentler forms, a frail heartbeat that refuses to stop fighting, a loyal dog that senses what humans cannot, a stubborn winter storm that seems strangely alive, or a little girl who believes the weather itself has feelings. Perhaps God does not always calm the storm around us. Sometimes, he teaches our hearts how to listen to it. And in that listening, we discover that even in silence, God is speaking. So if you are standing in the middle of your own storm, fear, loss, loneliness, or uncertainty, hold on. Pray deeply. Trust quietly. Miracles rarely arrive when we expect them, but they always arrive when we need them. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your own miracle story, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue spreading stories of faith, second chances, and love that never gives up. May God bless you, your family, and the storms you have yet to overcome.